Honestly, the only consensus about this Sacramento Kings offseason is that we have no idea what the Kings are going to do. But for the sake of the podcast and getting us through this offseason, let's get a little crazy with it. I have a chaotic, all-in type move that may blow up in the Sacramento Kings' faces. But I'm intrigued, and it's growing on me. I'll share it with you right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all off-season long. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. Now, there's two major ways that we can approach this Kings offseason. There's the careful and logical way, and then there's the ambitious, emotional, and, for lack of a better term, kind of spontaneously sporadic way. We're going to lean into that side a little bit. I've talked a lot to you over the last handful of months, but especially to start this offseason, about how caged in I feel the Sacramento Kings are, how caged in Scott Perry is as he's inherited this mess with the Kings that they put themselves in, and he has to try and slowly work his way out of it. But what if Scott Perry just decided to throw absolute caution to the wind? Whether it was a mandate from ownership to still try and compete and still make the playoffs, and the Kings needing to make a drastic move in order to make that happen, or Scott Perry just going rogue. We're going to go through and dive into a move that I just classify as chaotic. Something that I don't think I'm crazy in saying it's not out of the realm of possibility. I don't know how logical it is. There certainly is a tremendous amount of risk to this move, with a highly volatile likelihood of it putting the Sacramento Kings in an even worse place than where they are now. Plus, it removes Scott Perry's get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to the state of the Sacramento Kings. Right now, where the Kings are at has nothing to do with Perry. It's not his fault. But if Perry were to make a move like I'm about to suggest to you here, it would be him essentially committing to this direction for the Kings that you've heard me many a time criticize, tear down, and talk about how poor I think it is. I'm not going to waste any more time. Here is the move. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can probably already guess by the thumbnail. What if the Sacramento Kings attempt to make a trade for Atlanta Hawks star point guard Trae Young? Again, a incredibly volatile move. Let's break this thing down in pieces. Number one, the Kings need a point guard. Trae Young is an established point guard. Now, he is a scoring first guard for sure, especially with that three-point shooting ability, an unbelievable, uncanny three-point shooting ability. He also is a very, very flashy, I'll say, passer. How much do I think Trae Young is a floor general, a leader in that sense as a true point guard? We've gotten kind of mixed results of that. He's had really, really good moments when the Atlanta Hawks went on their big playoff run a handful of seasons ago, but he's probably a little inconsistent when it comes to a true blue floor general point guard, which, assuming the Kings can pull this move off of bringing Trae Young in without trading away Domantas Sabonis, maybe the Kings are a little more equipped to have a scoring first point guard, a three-point shooting point guard who is still a very talented passer, but doesn't have to be the floor general because the Kings can, in theory, continue to play through Domantas Sabonis. Shooting, playmaking. You check both of those boxes with Trae Young. But in order to check those boxes, you are selling defense. You are completely punting on any kind of defensive mindset, right? That's not to say that hopefully Keon Ellis and Keegan Murray would still be on this roster and those guys can still help you shoulder the defensive load like they've been doing over the last 2 seasons. That doesn't necessarily have to go away. This Trae Young move would logically go very against what we believe Doug Christie's mindset to be as a defensive-minded player himself, and one of the traits that Scott Perry laid out for this Kings team going forward. It does not fit in that box. But again, we're talking chaos here. Now, let me tell you why this move is growing on me. One of the things I've asked for, in fact, it's probably the thing I've asked the most for from the Sacramento Kings this offseason. Give me something to be intrigued about again. Give me something to be hopeful about again. I fully recognize logically, when actually thinking about this and not just running with my heart, I understand logically that this has a very good chance that it will not work. And with this roster as constructed, I don't think long-term it will work unless there's some pretty significant changes in addition to the Trae Young acquisition. We're talking a year or 2 or 3 down the road. Maybe when Sabonis' contract is easier to move or Zach LaVine comes off the books. Short term, though, I mean, it's entertaining. Tell me you wouldn't be at least intrigued. No, I know you're a liar. You 100% would be intrigued. You would be tuning in on opening night. Now, you do anyway because you're a sicko Kings fan like I am. That's why you're listening to this podcast in the middle of the offseason after the season that we just were put through. But you're going to be even more locked in, even more intrigued to watch and see what this team would look like with Trae Young as its starting point guard. I can promise you this, it's going to sell tickets too. Why? Because the Sacramento Kings are essentially going all in again on having one of the best offenses we have ever seen. Doug Christie has talked about wanting a high volume of 3-point attempts. He's talked about 50 3-point attempts in a game before. You have Trae Young, you have Zach LaVine, you're going to get up a lot of 3-pointers. And yes, in the next segment, we'll break down what this trade theoretically could look like, what this deal could look like to get Trae Young here to Sacramento. But I'll tell you now, it does not involve Zach LaVine and it does not involve Domantas Sabonis. Even if both of those contracts financially are very similar to the contract that Trae Young is on, which, by the way, he's owed $45.9 million next season. And then the following season, he has a $48.9 million player option, which I believe he will exercise. So you're essentially trading for 2 years at least of Trae Young. Financially, the Sabonis contracts and the LaVine contracts kind of fit that. But as we'll break down, I don't know if the Atlanta Hawks, why would they trade Trae Young for a worse star in both of those, right? As much as I love Domantas Sabonis, Sabonis doesn't have the potential to be a number one guy like Trae Young does or has been, at least in the past. Granted, he hasn't had the greatest of success rates. Look, this goes against a lot of what I have been preaching. That's why this episode might be confusing for you. And I'm going to be honest. When recording this podcast, before I hit record, I told myself I'm going to leave a little bit of logic at the door. I'm going to try and have fun with this a little bit because there aren't a lot of scenarios. Pretty much all scenarios where the Kings try and go all in, I hate. I do not like. And there is absolutely a part of me that does not like this Trae Young gamble either. But again, we're talking about entertainment purposes. We're talking about giving me a reason to care about next season. This trade would do it. Now let's break down what this deal potentially looks like. Plus, I'll share with you what Brad Rowland, the host of the Locked On Hawks, had to say when I reached out to him and said, hey, let's talk a Trae Young deal. Let's see if this is even something remotely possible. I'll share the Hawks perspective of what Brad told me coming up here in just a second. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Wayfair. The days are getting longer, the weather's warming up, and people are spending more time outside, which means it's the perfect time to refresh your outdoor space, whether you're working with a big backyard or even just a small balcony. Wayfair has everything you need to make it feel more like you. Wayfair's massive selection of outdoor essentials makes it easy to transform any space into your ideal summer setup. From comfy conversation sets to sleek dining tables and outdoor decor, they've got it all, and at the prices that fit your budget. You can grab a new patio dining set and some string lights from Wayfair to help extend your outdoor space. I love the mix of styles that you have out there. My wife and I have very different styles, and even Wayfair has enough to check both of our boxes and help us meet in the middle without spending a fortune. Delivery is free and hassle-free, even for the big stuff, whether you're entertaining guests or just wanting to relax solo. Shop Wayfair to help you unwind. Shop a huge selection of outdoor furniture online. This summer, get outside with Wayfair. Head to WayFair.com right now. That's WayFair.com. Wayfair. Every style, every home. All right, so by now you're either vibing with me on this crazy train of a Trae Young trade this offseason, or you think I'm absolutely insane. Either way, let's explore what this trade could potentially look like. Now, I reached out to Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks. I said, hey, humor me. Let's talk about what a potential Trae Young deal with the Sacramento Kings could look like. I said, give me a conversation starter that you would need on the table. Not like a final deal or final proposal or anything like that, but conversation starter. How do we get this conversation going? And immediately my guy Brad shut it down. Dang you, Brad. He said, essentially there's a win now mandate in Atlanta. And it doesn't make any sense for them to move Trae Young when they have a win now mandate. So I said, wow, the Atlanta Hawks are basically the Sacramento Kings. Cool. Congratulations. Enjoy that out east. It's going great for us here out west. So Brad's not willing to humor it necessarily because of this win now mandate in Atlanta. So yeah, it gives me important context. The Sacramento Kings, if they're going to pull this off, which again, I do not think is out of the realm of possibility, might be unlikely, but I do not think it's impossible. The Atlanta Hawks cannot look at their roster, maybe with the exception of Dyson Daniels, and say nobody is untouchable, or say anybody is untouchable, right? Like, they have to look at their roster the same way the Sacramento Kings are looking at their roster and going, yeah, for the right price, we will move anybody and everybody. Again, maybe Dyson Daniels is the exception in Atlanta. So, that context in mind, now I'm thinking, okay, if the Kings are going to make this happen, they have to make a good enough offer to get the Atlanta Hawks to get off of that win now mandate, or feel that they can still accomplish that win now mandate without Trae Young. But more than likely, the Sacramento Kings would have to make an offer that's realistic, that is almost too good for Atlanta to refuse. Again, we're not talking about the Kings going out and getting Giannis Antetokounmpo. It's not like, oh, we need to start the bidding at 5 first-round picks. Like, none of that nonsense. Because the Hawks have to also look at the mirror and go, yeah, we've had Trae Young for, what is it? How many years has it been? 6 years or something like that? 7 years? We've had Trae Young for this amount of time. We really haven't had any success beyond one season. Wow. How familiar is that here in Sacramento? So, what does a potential deal look like to get them to either move on from that win now mandate or still go for that win now, but without Trae Young? Like I said earlier, Sabonis and LaVine do not make sense as part of this deal. Even if the money works, that's an easy way to make this trade work if you're playing NBA 2K or using a trade machine online. But that doesn't make sense. Trading Zach LaVine for Trae Young makes the Hawks worse and gives them a bad contract. It ain't happening. Domantas Sabonis doesn't really make sense because if you're trading a point guard for a center, they already have center depth. I know they look at Dyson Daniels as a potential point guard going forward, but like we talked about, Sabonis is not a number one guy, so therefore they'd be lacking a number one guy. So I don't think that makes any sense, and I think the Hawks know as well as we know that Domantas Sabonis is not suddenly vaulting them into the conversation unless he's going there to partner with Trae Young, which we know is not happening in this scenario. Plus, we're trying to get Trae Young to Sacramento while keeping, for the most part, this core of highly paid, very expensive players intact to say, F it, let's go for it. Let's try it. Let's get crazy. Right? That's the point of this conversation. So what does this deal look like? Well, the money works with Malik Monk and DeMar DeRozan. Now, Malik Monk, 3 years on his deal, solid six-man, can potentially run the point, back up Dyson Daniels off of the bench. I think the Hawks, that's the way that they would use him. DeMar DeRozan, he's the main financial piece of this deal, and his $22 or whatever $million. He's the main financial piece of this deal to help make this deal go through. You get 1 full year of DeMar, and then the next year, or the following season, is partially guaranteed. So the Hawks could either run it back for 1 more year if it's working, or just cut ties, pay him whatever that slight partial guarantee is, and now they have all that money off the books and they're free to spend some more money to try and add on to whatever core they have in Atlanta. Straight up, this deal isn't enough. Even if financially it works, Malik Monk and DeMar DeRozan are not enough for Trae Young. I don't even have to ask Brad Rowland to know the answer to that or know that's true. So the question is, 1, do you include Keon Ellis? Keon Ellis making $2 million. In fact, if you were to put Monk, DeRozan, and Keon all as part of this deal, it would almost to the dollar meet or fit with what Trae Young is making. So financially, it's almost a wash. Now, granted, the Hawks are getting 3 players, the Kings are getting 1. So the roster space becomes a little bit of a tricky situation there. Keon Ellis, obviously very valuable to the Sacramento Kings. Keon Ellis next to Dyson Daniels could be very intriguing. It gives the Hawks a young player that they could in theory have control over going forward that they feel pretty good about for this new defensive backcourt that they would have there in Atlanta. Or how many first-round picks you're willing to give up in this deal. See, this is where it gets tricky, right? Because I've been telling you, and again, logical Matt George coming back. I've been telling you, I do not want the Sacramento Kings to use the now freed up treasure trove of first-round picks that they have now that the pick has finally conveyed to Atlanta, by the way, in the Kevin Huerter deal. That pick has finally conveyed the 13th overall pick that should be the Kings is Atlanta's. That's conveyed. That frees up everything else. So now, hey, Scott Perry, you can make a foolish trade with the Atlanta Hawks involving future first-round picks if you want. I've been hesitant for the Kings to mortgage their future and use these assets to go all in with this group. Again, that's logical, Matt George. We're talking about kind of chaotic fun, Matt George, right now. This is the major gamble part of it because at minimum, there's 1 first-round pick on the table. And I mean at minimum. Right? It would be tough to get the Atlanta Hawks to say yes to just 1 first-round pick in this deal with Keon Ellis included. Like we're talking Monk, DeRozan, Keon, and a future first, probably, to get this deal done. You might be shaking your head already going, no deal, Matt, not doing it. Nope, not for me. Okay, well that's where the conversation ends. But if we're serious about the Kings trying to go all in, trying to get a point guard and another star, someone who can light it up 3-point wise, I'm thinking you have to put minimum 2 first-round picks on the table. It could be with protections, without protections. You could also throw a pick swap in there. You could do like the Kings 2026 first rounder, a pick swap in 2027, and the Kings 2028 first rounder, and call it a deal. Again, this is the area where you have to sweeten it. Excuse me. You have to sweeten it to where the Hawks are willing to say bye-bye to that win now mandate or move on from Trae Young. Now, I don't think you have to go overboard. What I just laid out is like the furthest, absolute furthest that I'd be comfortable with, and I'd probably, as soon as they said yes to that deal and it processed and went through, I'd have a little bit of buyer's remorse giving up that much. Again, I'm talking a trade that is Monk, DeRozan, 2 future firsts, and a pick swap for Trae Young. That's a lot. That is a lot. But if you believe that Trae Young can really make that big of a difference, might be what it takes to do it. If you want to go all in, this is what an all-in type trade looks like. Again, logical Matt George says, no, no, do not do it. But you want chaos, you want fun, I present to you this. So I ask you, what does your trade package for Trae Young look like? Are we at the point where Matt end the podcast, hang up the phone, this conversation ain't happening, it stops there? So you can be honest with me. Again, we're having fun. We're podding, as D-Lo and KC from ESPN 1320 like to say. We're podding here. We're having fun. Talking about this crazy, chaotic, hypothetical if the Sacramento Kings really want to truly go all in this offseason and add a star caliber player and point guard. What do you think about that? There's another name. Another name that I don't like as much as Trae Young. But another name that I hear people talking about when talking about a kind of crazy, chaotic star swing move the Kings could make this summer. I'll share with you what that name is in just a second. This episode of Locked On Kings is also brought to you by CarGurus. Shopping for a car should be exciting, not exhausting. But between the confusing prices and hidden fees, it can feel overwhelming. That's why using CarGurus is the way to go. They help you cut through the noise and show you the best deals with full confidence. With over 4 million listings, CarGurus has more new and used cars than any other major online marketplace in the United States. They verify dealers, provide real price analysis, and give you the tools and data that you need to make the right choice without second guessing yourself. If you need a deal that you can trust, CarGurus makes it easy to compare vehicles side by side with unbiased deal ratings. The best feature, price drop alerts, so you know exactly when that perfect car that you want is available in your budget. Plus, in-depth vehicle details give you peace of mind before even stepping onto any lot, so you know exactly what you're looking at. It's no wonder SimilarWeb estimated traffic data shows CarGurus is the #1 most visited car shopping site. Buy or sell your next car today with CarGurus at CarGurus.com. Go to CarGurus.com to make sure your big deal is the best deal. That's CarGurus.com. CarGurus.com. So if Trae Young isn't doing it for you, may I present to you Ja Morant. Now this deal is a little more out of the realm of possibility for me. But hey, we're having fun, right? We're getting chaotic. We're getting crazy, right? Ja Morant very well may be available. Not necessarily saying he isn't. And obviously there's a lot of changes and kind of some weird things happening in Memphis with the firing Taylor Jenkins at the very end of the season. To me, just reading the tea leaves, I think Trae Young is way more acquirable by the Sacramento Kings specifically than Ja Morant is. Unless the Memphis Grizzlies are going full-on rebuild, which I don't know why they would, because they still have Desmond Bane. They would still have Jaren Jackson Jr. in this scenario. They're not fire sale. They're not blowing it up. And that is a team that, if there's a win-now mandate between the Grizzlies and the Hawks, I trust it more in Memphis than I trust it in Atlanta. So what that tells me is, number one, it's going to be harder to get Ja Morant. Therefore, number two, Ja Morant's going to be even more expensive than Trae Young, or it's going to take a lot more to get Ja Morant than Trae Young. Now, Ja's contract situation is better in terms of long term. I think there's 3 years left on Ja Morant's deal. And actually, he would be the cheapest out of Sabonis, Levine, and Morant. Ja would be, even if he's the clear number one, Ja would be the cheapest out of the three. Go figure. So what does a Ja Morant deal look like? I was looking at this. It's essentially DeRozan and Keegan and potentially Keon Ellis. Because if we were going to do like the DeRozan Monk deal, the same thing, or a core of the deal, the same thing that we did with Atlanta, that would actually be $4 million coming off of Sacramento's book and going into Memphis's pocket. Why would the Memphis Grizzlies take on more salary to get rid of Ja Morant when they're trading the best player in the deal? Doesn't make sense. They're not going to do it. If you're going to convince the Grizzlies to do this, you have to give up minimum one of Keegan and Keon, most likely both of them in this trade, not to mention draft compensation on top of that. Again, the price tag for Ja Morant is bigger, is different than the price tag for Trae Young. So, does that intrigue you more though? Ja Morant, Zach LaVine, Domantas Sabonis, maybe a team that's a little more defensively inclined than Trae Young at that point guard position, but an explosive potentially team, but also a team that is, I don't know how good that team's going to be. You tell me. Trae Young, Ja Morant, neither. Matt George, never do an episode like this again. You're crazy. Go back to being grumpy and logical. I don't know. I would love to hear from you. Any other names that you want to throw into the pot of kind of a crazy offseason? Your packages that you would put together for either or both of these players. I would appreciate that. Don't worry. We get back to some more logical conversation on tomorrow's Locked On Kings podcast. I'm going to have Damian Barling from ESPN 1320 join me. He and I are going to look back at this past season and try and identify if we could change one thing, what would have the most positive difference for the Kings. If we could pick one thing that happened last season and change it, flip it, cancel it, whatever, it would have fixed most of the problems for Sacramento or stopped them from getting to this position. What that is, Damian and I will discuss that on tomorrow's episode. Appreciate your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.